It all started on a Friday night vigil. Pastor Ezekiel was praying for a woman, and suddenly, the lights flickered. His shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor, then crawled up the walls like a living thing. It wasn't following his movements, it was moving on its own. I sat frozen in my seat, unsure of what I'd just seen. It lasted only seconds, but it felt like forever. That was the moment I realized something about Pastor Ezekiel wasn't right. Pastor Ezekiel arrived in our town 3 years ago. He was charismatic, always smiling, and spoke with authority. He claimed to perform miracles in God's name, and soon, the sick, barren, and desperate flooded his church. Everyone believed in him. Blind people claimed they could see. Cripples got up and walked. Women who couldn't conceive had children. People called him a man of God. I did too, until I saw the shadow. I became a devoted member of Pastor Ezekiel's church when my sister was healed. She'd been bedridden for years, with no diagnosis from any doctor. But after Pastor Ezekiel prayed for her, she stood up and walked. My family believed this was proof of his divine power. We gave offerings, volunteered in the church, and became part of his loyal followers. For a time, I was convinced he was sent by God. 2 weeks after a Sunday service, I ran into a woman who had testified about being healed of cancer. She was in the hospital, looking worse than ever. Confused, I asked her why she was there. She avoided my eyes and whispered, "They paid me to say I was healed." When I asked who, she refused to answer and walked away. I didn't know what to think. Could Pastor Ezekiel be lying about his miracles? I couldn't get that woman's words out of my head. If she was lying, how many others were lying too? Could my sister's healing have been a coincidence? I started paying closer attention in church. Some testimonies didn't make sense. People claimed miracles that no one could verify. But whenever I asked questions, the church members would shut me down. One night, I dreamt of Pastor Ezekiel standing in a dark forest surrounded by snakes. They hissed and coiled around him as he laughed. His laughter echoed, deep and inhuman. When I woke up, my heart was pounding. I brushed it off as just a bad dream, but the nightmares kept coming. Each one felt more real than the last. One evening after service, I stayed back to clean the church. I heard Pastor Ezekiel talking in his office. The words didn't sound like any language I knew. I peeked through the door and saw him kneeling before a small black pot. Smoke rose from it, and he was sprinkling something red into it. His face looked different, darker, like a shadow had fallen over him. Around this time, people began noticing something strange. The church collected large offerings every week, but the money never seemed to go back into the community or the church building. Whenever someone asked about it, Pastor Ezekiel would say, "God's work takes time." But the questions never stopped nagging me. Where was all the money going? During one service, a woman came forward, crying about her missing child. Pastor Ezekiel prayed over her, promising that God would return her child. But as he prayed, I noticed something strange. His voice deepened, almost like two people were speaking at once. When he finished, he looked exhausted, as though the prayer had drained him. At another night vigil, the lights flickered during a prayer session. I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when I saw the shadow again. This time, it looked like a snake, coiling up the wall before disappearing. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A few people whispered among themselves, but no one dared say anything out loud. I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I spoke to 2 church members I trusted and told them everything I'd seen, the shadow, the fake miracles, and the rituals. At first, they didn't believe me. But when I mentioned the black pot, one of them gasped. She had seen it too, hidden in a corner of Pastor Ezekiel's office. One of the church members had been secretly recording Pastor Ezekiel. She played the video for us, and my blood ran cold. In the video, he was chanting in that strange language, pouring blood into the pot. The three of us decided we needed to expose him. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. During the next service, I stood up after his sermon and asked, "Pastor, where do your powers come from?" The entire church went silent. Pastor Ezekiel froze, his smile fading. His hands began to tremble as he stammered, "From God, of course." Before he could continue, the church member with the recording stood up and played it for everyone to hear. Gasps filled the room as the strange chanting echoed through the speakers. Some people started shouting, demanding answers. Others sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to believe. Pastor Ezekiel's face turned pale as the recording continued to play. "This is a lie. Someone is trying to bring me down," he shouted, his voice trembling. But the church members weren't convinced. People started whispering, questioning everything they'd seen and believed. The pastor's confident demeanor was gone, replaced by panic. Before anyone could stop him, Pastor Ezekiel grabbed his Bible and bolted out of the church. His bodyguards, who always stood close by, quickly followed him out. Some of the members ran after him, but he got into his car and sped off. For the first time, the church felt empty, not just in numbers but in spirit. After Pastor Ezekiel fled, the church members gathered outside in confusion and anger. Some were crying, while others were shouting at the elders for answers. It felt like the whole foundation of our faith had been shaken. A group of us decided to investigate further. If Pastor Ezekiel wasn't coming back, we needed to know the truth. We went into his office to look for evidence. Behind a cabinet, we found a small door leading to a hidden room. It was dark and musty, with shelves lined with bottles containing strange liquids. There were feathers, bones, and items that looked like they were used for rituals. In the middle of the room was the black pot I'd seen in my dreams and through the office door that night. It smelled of burnt herbs and something metallic, like blood. One of the elders identified it as a pot used in traditional witchcraft rituals. Word spread quickly about what we'd found. Soon, people from neighboring towns started coming forward with their own stories about Pastor Ezekiel. Many claimed he had performed fake miracles in their communities before disappearing overnight. Some former members of his team also began confessing. One usher admitted he was paid to fake a healing during service. A woman claimed she was hired to cry during testimonies to make the miracle seem real. The final blow came when we discovered that Pastor Ezekiel had emptied the church accounts before fleeing. All the money from tithes, offerings, and special donations, gone. For weeks, the community was in chaos. Families who had given everything to the church were devastated. Some people refused to believe the truth, insisting that the accusations were lies from the devil. The church elders held an emergency meeting. They decided to cleanse the building, both physically and spiritually. They invited a local pastor who prayed over every corner, sprinkling holy water and rebuking any evil spirits. The black pot and other items were burned in a large bonfire outside the church. People cried as they watched the flames consume the objects, as if releasing the hold Pastor Ezekiel had over them. It took months for the community to heal. Many people stopped attending church altogether, afraid of being deceived again. Others sought smaller, more personal gatherings to worship. For me, it was a lesson I would never forget. I learned that faith should never be blindly placed in a man, no matter how powerful or charismatic he seems.